Pakistan says it has launched a military operation against India.
Pakistan has accused India of igniting an inferno in the region.
Tensions between India and Pakistan continue to rise as the two nuclear powers exchange heavy artillery.
US officials have confirmed Pakistan used Chinese J-10 jets to launch missiles.
India is currently engaged in two major battles, one overt with Pakistan, visible to all, and another covert and insidious with China. Just days after India carried out air strikes in response to Pakistan's brutal terrorist actions, Chinese state agencies and online platforms activated full-scale propaganda efforts. On Weibo and other networks, hashtags like #IndiaStrikes and #IndiaStartedWar trended rapidly, painting India as the provocateur. Influencers, including semi-official accounts, posted exaggerated and false tales of Indian losses and Pakistani dominance. The Global Times and similar state-backed Chinese outlets published harsh editorials pinning the blame squarely on India while carefully avoiding any reference to the deadly attack that triggered the escalation. Their messaging subtly threatened retaliation, echoing chilling language last heard before the 1962 war. Chinese military bloggers started uploading archival videos of PLA troops and gear, falsely portraying them as fresh movements near the Indian frontier in Tibet. These posts aimed to stoke fear, implying that China was preparing for direct engagement. Even national broadcasters aired old PLA exercises while presenting them as current mobilizations. They framed the footage as China's readiness to face India and resist so-called Indian expansionist aims. The intent was unmistakable: to show strength, manipulate perception, and pressure India psychologically. This silent information warfare complements the conventional threat on India's Western Front, forcing the nation to handle two very different but simultaneous confrontations, one in full view, the other lurking in digital shadows. Let's begin with the idea of expansionism. In this case, they're pointing directly at Jammu and Kashmir, a region of India that has been occupied by both Pakistan and China. However, what's truly making China anxious is a specific area called the Shaksgam Valley. This region lies within Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Back in 1963, Pakistan secretly transferred around 2,000 square miles of its crucial territory to China under the Sino-Pakistan Agreement, a deal that India has firmly opposed since day one. In fact, a little over a year later, the Indian Parliament passed a unanimous resolution affirming that the entirety of Jammu and Kashmir, including areas held by Pakistan and China, with special reference to Shaksgam Valley and Aksai Chin, is an inseparable, integral part of India. Now, as regional tensions climb steadily, the likelihood of a full-blown conflict grows stronger. If war does erupt, there is a real possibility that India could recapture the Pak region. Should that occur, Pakistan might collapse as a state. This could lead to long-suppressed regions like Balochistan achieving long-sought independence, while the rest of Pakistan disintegrates into turmoil. China cannot afford such an outcome. It would be catastrophic for them. Their trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing's master plan for economic expansion, would suffer an immediate and devastating blow. China has already funneled over $60 billion into Pakistan via the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPC. They've built roads, railways, energy plants, manufacturing zones, and most notably Gwadarport, a key maritime outlet to the Arabian Sea. All of this investment had one core purpose: to create a dependable trade route bypassing the Strait of Malacca, a narrow and highly exposed waterway between Indonesia and Malaysia. This choke point can easily be blocked in a crisis by India, the US, or any adversary. If that happens, China's trade lifeline could be severed. This is precisely why the Chinese Communist Party is now scrambling to ease tensions through diplomatic efforts. They fully grasp that if an all-out conflict begins and China avoids military involvement, Pakistan is likely to crumble. But perhaps that's part of the bigger strategy. If Pakistan collapses, China suddenly has a valid reason to send in troops under the claim of safeguarding its assets and interests. But there's another major reason why Beijing is so alarmed. In early April, specifically around the 7th, a rumor emerged that Apple was preparing to relocate all iPhone manufacturing out of China and into India. At first, it sounded like speculation. But when Chinese authorities investigated further, they discovered it was absolutely true. Not just Apple, but tech leaders like Google, Dell, HP, Walmart, and several others were also planning major moves to India. That one rumor sent shockwaves across Chinese leadership. And why wouldn't it? We're talking about hundreds of billions in potential economic loss. If you've been following our coverage, you already know that China's economy is hanging by a thread. A hit this huge could be fatal. So the CCP began searching for drastic solutions. That's when it hit them. If India is thrown into instability, those global firms may start rethinking their strategy. Just 2 weeks later, on April 22nd, India experienced its deadliest terror attack in more than 10 years. Step back and piece everything together. Can you spot the chilling trend here? India is hit, and almost instantly, terror outfits operating from Pakistan proudly accept responsibility. In response, India acts with precision, launching a measured military operation aimed at neutral targets, clearly avoiding any major escalation. But Pakistan doesn't hold back. Instead, they respond with force, firing missiles and unleashing waves of suicide drones across Indian cities. The strikes cause civilian deaths and dozens of injuries, a blatant act of war. At this point, India is left with no real option but to respond with even greater intensity. For China, Pakistan was the ideal pawn. Their deep-rooted hostility toward India made them the perfect proxy. And let's be honest, Pakistan's long-standing dependence on China makes it more of a satellite than a sovereign ally. Think of it this way. If you're in Beijing and you've got a troublesome pet you don't care much for, it's easy to send it off to pick a fight on your behalf. If things go south, it's the pet that gets punished, not the master. Now let's analyze how China might proceed against each Indian state based on years of strategic assessments, war simulations, and geopolitical studies. We'll begin with the most obvious flashpoint, the frozen heights of Ladakh, more precisely the Aksai Chin region. This is the same territory that China seized during the 1962 war. Why? Because Aksai Chin holds immense strategic value. It acts as a direct corridor linking Tibet with Xinjiang, and it's a vital artery for Chinese military logistics. Running through this terrain is the Western Highway, the G219. In case of a war, Chinese forces could initiate a classic pincer movement. Troops from the PLA would advance eastward from Aksai Chin, while units from Pakistan push in from Gilgit-Baltistan to the west. The goal would be to trap Indian troops positioned in Ladakh, effectively cutting them off from reinforcements and placing key zones like the Siachen Glacier and Karakoram Pass under imminent threat. PLA brigades trained for high-altitude operations could target forward Indian posts such as Dullet Beg Oldi, India's northernmost and highest air base. If Dullet Beg Oldi is taken, India's control over the critical subsector north could disappear almost overnight. To add more pressure, long-range Chinese artillery systems and rocket batteries hidden deep in Tibet and Xinjiang could launch massive strikes against Indian supply hubs and infrastructure in Leh. These barrages would weaken India's ability to maintain frontline positions or rush in reserves when needed. What's China's endgame in Ladakh? Land control. Beijing wants full authority over Aksai Chin, and possibly even more land below the current line of actual control. Taking that ground would ensure unimpeded use of the G219 highway and serve as a protective shield for the China-Pakistan economic corridor, a vital part of China's global trade ambitions. It would effectively form a direct land corridor to Pakistan, tightening China's strategic noose around India's neck. Most critically, a full-scale Chinese assault in Ladakh would compel India to shift its military focus away from the Western Front, granting Pakistan, China's closest ally, a much-needed tactical pause. A similar playbook was seen during the 1965 Indo-Pak War, when China issued direct threats and mobilized near Sikkim, forcing India to brace for a two-front conflict. At that time, China refrained from direct involvement, but today's PLA is vastly stronger, and that past bluff could easily be acted upon. Sadly for India, China has spent decades preparing for such a scenario. Its enormous infrastructure push has given the PLA significant mobility superiority across the entire Ladakh sector. All-weather roads, modern airstrips, and dozens of quickly deployable brigade-level camps have been constructed along the LAC. The ideal strategy for Beijing would be to strike without warning, catching India off balance and forcing New Delhi into a reactive state before fully grasping what's unfolding. In fact, several defense analysts have warned that from 2025 to 2030, China may possess a localized military advantage over India, a narrow window where it could exploit its edge to deliver a swift and possibly decisive blow. But things don't always go as planned. While China might appear dominant on paper, real combat rarely follows predictions. There are countless ways this could fall apart for Beijing. Take Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Despite its size and might, the Russian army has been bogged down for over 3 years in a drawn-out, costly, and humiliating fight. That same kind of strategic nightmare could just as easily unfold for China, or even spiral into something worse. To begin with, combat at elevations above 14,000 feet is brutally difficult. Even China's elite mountain forces struggle against altitude sickness, brutal climate, and severe supply issues. Meanwhile, Indian troops aren't new to these heights. They've trained and served in this region for years. Ladakh isn't some convenient battlefield. It's among the harshest environments known to man. Over time, India has adapted well, strengthening border infrastructure, enhancing high-altitude warfare training, and deploying advanced weapon systems precisely for such a confrontation. Plus, if China chooses to step into a direct conflict with India, it's playing with geopolitical fire. India isn't some fragile state. It's a nuclear-armed heavyweight with global alliances and strategic partnerships that have grown stronger in response to rising Chinese hostility. Countries like the US, Japan, Australia, France, and the United Kingdom have all expanded cooperation with India, from defense deals to intelligence sharing, in clear preparation for possible Chinese escalation. So China launching a full-scale war wouldn't be a simple border clash. It could rapidly spark a huge international reaction. Think of immediate sanctions, global diplomatic fallout, and Western countries fast-tracking military aid to India. And if China is seen siding militarily with Pakistan, the optics alone would be disastrous. Regional players like Australia, Japan, and ASEAN nations concerned about the South China Sea might swiftly align with India in an anti-China coalition. We could very realistically see the formation of a united Asian front pushing back against Beijing's expansionism nearly overnight. But it's important to realize that this isn't just about Ladakh. There are still 2 other high-risk battle zones that could escalate just as dangerously, maybe even more. If Indian troops become overly committed in Ladakh, China's next move might come from the east. That's where the McMahon Line sits, the disputed boundary dividing China and the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which Beijing controversially refers to as South Tibet, claiming it as Chinese territory. China's top priority in the region would likely be the Tawang sector, not just because of its location, but due to its symbolic weight. It's the birthplace of the Dalai Lama, and taking it would give Beijing a huge diplomatic advantage while tightening its grip on the Tibetan population. Controlling Tawang would also let China outmaneuver India's entire eastern front, capturing key ridgelines that overlook the vital Brahmaputra Valley below. And this wouldn't be a first. In the 1962 war, China blitzed through this very sector. Their forces seized Tawang with alarming speed and held it for weeks before stepping back. If full war breaks out again, Beijing would likely aim for a repeat. Alongside this, Chinese forces might simultaneously strike farther east, targeting sectors like Dibong and Lohit Valley, forcing India to stretch troops across more than 1,000 kilometers of rugged, mountainous frontier. The goal is clear: overwhelm India's ability to focus its defenses. By attacking at multiple points, China could thin out Indian troop density, weakening resistance where it matters most. Even a small successful Chinese push into Arunachal would be a massive political card, allowing Beijing to offer a retreat in exchange for India surrendering its claims on Aksai Chin. But as with Ladakh, it's not simple. While China could steamroll through Arunachal in 1962, back then India was ill-prepared, poorly armed, and caught completely off guard. That's no longer the case. Today's Indian forces are vastly better trained, experienced in jungle and mountain combat, and deeply entrenched in hardened defensive positions built up over decades. And this region isn't easy terrain. Arunachal is covered with dense forests, steep slopes, wild rivers, and near-constant rainfall. It's a logistical and tactical nightmare for any invading force, even China's. Their soldiers would face thick jungle, unstable ground, and frequent surprise attacks by Indian units trained to operate precisely in these environments. Worse still, resupplying frontline troops would be a major challenge. Chinese supply lines would stretch deep into some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth, far from secure bases and exposed to constant disruptions. What looks feasible on a map may quickly turn into a drawn-out, grinding mess in reality. India has been forced to adapt through experience. Over the past 10 years, it has dramatically upgraded infrastructure along the eastern frontier, constructing new airstrips, reinforced garrisons, concrete shelters, and a network of access roads designed for rapid deployment of troops and vital logistics. These aren't just precautionary moves, they're precise responses to real threats, ensuring India can react fast and effectively wherever the situation demands. Now we reach perhaps the most precarious flashpoint in the entire region, a geographical bottleneck so critical that if compromised, India could face strategic disaster. This is the Siliguri Corridor, or what many call the Chicken's Neck. It's here that China may deploy a powerful indirect strategy, using a proxy force. And that proxy? None other than Bangladesh. This narrow land link in India's northeast is no wider than 20 kilometers at its slimmest point. It's the only road and rail connection between the Indian heartland and its entire northeastern region. Should this corridor be blocked or severed, 7 full states could become totally cut off from the rest of India, militarily, economically, and logistically. China is acutely aware of how critical this zone is. Now, with recent political realignments in Bangladesh, the balance is tilting fast and dangerously in China's favor. Under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Dhaka long managed a diplomatic balance between Beijing and New Delhi. But after her government was removed, the new leadership has moved quickly and openly to embrace China. Chinese money is flooding in. Massive new investments are reshaping Bangladesh's key infrastructure, from upgraded seaports to new highways, and even the modernization of a dual-use military airfield in Lalminarat, shockingly close, just 10 kilometers from Indian territory. It's no surprise that red flags are flying in New Delhi. With Bangladesh now publicly leaning toward China's orbit, India is staring down a strategic nightmare, an increasingly aligned adversary stationed just across its eastern flank. This new dynamic gives Beijing a serious tactical opening to strike with precision in a future conflict. But what does that actually look like? To begin with, Bangladesh could easily greenlight covert Chinese military operations within its borders. That might mean allowing Chinese special ops units or surveillance crews to quietly set up camp near the Indian frontier. Just one small radar post or mobile air defense battery tucked into the northwest could destabilize the entire Siliguri zone. A war front could ignite without any bombs falling. And there's more. Beijing could also activate a more indirect strategy by reigniting the insurgent movements that have long festered in India's northeast. This part of the country has endured decades of separatist unrest. These insurgents could sabotage supply chains, blowing up bridges, derailing trains, and ambushing convoys headed for the front lines. This kind of internal sabotage would put enormous pressure on India. New Delhi would be forced to divert troops away from the main battle zones, leaving fewer forces to face China or Pakistan. It's an age-old strategy. Stretch your enemy so thin that they lose cohesion. And then there's the north. Back in 2017, China attempted to quietly construct a road near the Dokala Plateau, dangerously close to the strategic tri-junction of India, China, and Bhutan. If completed, it would have given China a clear pathway to the Siliguri Corridor. India intervened back then and prevented it, but what if China tries again? Only this time, Indian troops are already busy facing aggression from 2 sides, Pakistan to the west and Bangladesh to the east. But here's the catch. The Chicken's Neck is no longer a soft target. Over the past 20 years, India has fortified this zone to an extreme level. Indian air defense has been upgraded with state-of-the-art Russian S-400 systems positioned all along the corridor. These missile platforms have already proven their capability in combat zones around the world, intercepting drones and rockets mid-flight with surgical precision. In India, they now serve as a powerful shield for cities and military posts alike. In addition, India has stationed several squadrons of its top-of-the-line fighter jets at a nearby airbase. These aircraft are designed for rapid interception and dominance in contested airspace. Any unauthorized incursion near the Siliguri corridor would be immediately challenged, whether from Chinese jets or Bangladeshi support aircraft. And on the ground, India hasn't been idle either. Large numbers of troops, from special forces to heavy armor units, now patrol the area. Advanced artillery systems, mobile battalions, and cutting-edge armored vehicles have been deployed to both the northern border with China and the eastern border with Bangladesh. In short, while Beijing might be eyeing the Siliguri corridor as a potential weak spot, what they'll actually find is one of India's most heavily protected regions. A direct strike here would not go unanswered. It would trigger a massive, coordinated military response that could push back any invading force long before it reaches strategic depth. Still, despite all that, China has countless reasons to think long and hard before making a move. There's no assurance of a fast or simple win, especially after recent border skirmishes. China has seen firsthand the intensity and grit with which Indian troops will fight to defend every bit of their land. A prolonged war in the unforgiving Himalayan heights could trap China's forces far from logistical support, much like Russia's ongoing quagmire in Ukraine. A deadlock or worse, a crushing and bloody failure would destroy China's reputation for power, seriously harming its status for decades. On the diplomatic front, if China attacks India, it becomes the clear-cut global villain. The world would immediately label Beijing the aggressor, drawing strong UN rebukes. A move like that would give Trump the perfect chance to hammer China with wave after wave of harsh sanctions. If China finds tariffs tough now, wait until it faces total global isolation. In a flash, China could become a full-blown pariah, unleashing an economic crisis that might haunt it for generations. And then there's the nuclear risk, often glossed over. India, China, and Pakistan all have nuclear arms. Beijing may hope to keep things conventional, below the nuclear line. But Pakistan's policy is vague, unstable, and dangerous. Any scenario that threatens India's survival could spiral into nuclear war. Chinese military strategists would need to tread extremely cautiously. They might steer clear of seizing major Indian cities or advancing too far into clearly contested Indian zones, all while trying to portray their offensive as some sort of controlled, defensive response. There's even a chance they'd attempt to sell it to the world as an effort to maintain peace in the region, claiming they're simply stopping India from crushing Pakistan. Of course, nobody would take that narrative seriously. Still, no matter how tightly China tries to manage the conflict, there would always be the looming danger that a single misstep, one minor error in judgment, might spark an uncontrollable nuclear disaster. And on the economic front, the consequences would be catastrophic for China, potentially even worse than for India. Yes, India's economy is smaller, but it's one of China's biggest trading partners, with trade exceeding $100 billion each year. A war would instantly sever those links. Even worse, India would rapidly align with the Western world, backing every sanction, embargo, and tech ban already building against China. Global investors would quickly retreat from the entire region, while shipping insurance across vital sea lanes like the Indian Ocean would spike. Most dangerously, China's essential energy imports, the fuel of its economy, would be at risk as U.S.-led naval forces blockade key routes. China might hope for a swift campaign with limited fallout, but a prolonged war would mean total economic suffocation. And none of this requires a single shot to be fired at Chinese territory. That's the type of crisis Beijing fears the most.